Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to this experimental live stream lecture in Sociology 2000 Global Social Problems at the University of Sydney. I'm Salvatore Bobonis and I'm going to be talking today about ways to reduce inequality. Two methods in particular, the promotion of equality of opportunity and the promotion of equality of outcomes. Now, this is an experiment doing a live lecture, so please bear with me, and I hope everything will work out well. I'd like to start with some graphs. So first, let me show you some figures, and I'm going to put up a chart of inequality in the United States. Now, this chart does not actually show inequality as such. What it shows is the rise in incomes in the United States over time. This is 1860, 168 years ago in the United States, and this is today, 2016. I have two figures here. Total GDP per capita, that is the total output of the US economy per person. And as you can see, it pretty much rises steadily over time. There's a dip in the Great Depression, there's a bump in World War II, but pretty much it just sort of rises. You can see the dip here in 2008 with the global financial crisis, and it starts rising again. But look at the income line. This shows male full-time worker income in the United States on the same scale. It peaked in 1973 and has been flat ever since. So really, if we look at US history, there are 113 years consistent record of incomes rising faster than the economy as a whole. And then after 1973, incomes completely flatline. They go nowhere, just flat for the next 45 years. Now, that's not just male incomes. We have data for long-term data for male incomes, but if we look at women's incomes, if we look at if we break it down into incomes by race, we see the same trends. We just see them over a shorter time period. So, for example, women's incomes on a per occupation basis have been stagnant for the last 50 years. Now, as higher income occupations have opened to women, some women have gotten higher and higher incomes. But if you look at the women working in any particular occupation, their incomes have been completely stagnant over the last 40 or 50 years. Now, it's not just the US. I'll put up some data here on European countries. These are the United States compared with the UK, France, the United Kingdom, and Sweden. And this uses the Gini code. This is using income share of the top 0.1%. So these are the very richest people in society. Not the super rich. The top 0.1% are top 1 in 1,000. These are the high income professionals and how much income they take home. Executives, top lawyers, top doctors, these university vice chancellors, these sorts of people. In the United States, in all countries, the income going to the top earners was declining from as far back as we have data, that's 1920, until the 1970s and early 1980s, consistently declining. From as far back as we have data until around the 1970s, 1980s, the rich were getting poorer. Now, they weren't getting poor, they were still rich, but they were having less and less of society's total income, and more of society's total income was going to everybody else. That changed completely starting in the 1970s. And as you can see, it changed dramatically in the United States. The United States had about the same level of income for rich people as other parts of the world. United States, United Kingdom, France were all similar. Sweden was a little more equal down here. But the United States dramatically pulled away from Europe since the 1970s. The United Kingdom also pulled away from Europe since the 1970s. But other countries like France, haven't had that much change. Sweden has had a rapid increase in inequality, but it still remains very low compared to inequality in the US or UK. So to a large extent, this is an Anglo-Saxon problem. Inequality is rising everywhere, but it started rising first in the United States and United Kingdom, and it has risen fastest in the United States and United Kingdom. Now, we don't have such great data for Australia, but I will show you what data we have. This is from the OECD, from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, their 2017 report on Australia's economy. And according to the OECD, you can see the Gini coefficient of inequality. The Gini coefficient is just a measure of inequality that runs from 0, perfect equality, up to 100, total inequality. You can see that in Australia, the Gini coefficient has risen from 0.31 in the 1990s up to something like 0.34 today. That's not a dramatic rise, but it's still a rise, and it's still one direction. Inequality seems to be rising in Australia as it has risen everywhere else. It's certainly not going down. Okay, now we can get out of the developed countries and look at developing countries. And the biggest two developing countries, China and India, have had massive increases in inequality. So here are the data for China. And this graph pits China against the United States. This is a Creative Commons license graph from an article published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States in 2014. You can see the citation down there. The trend of inequality in China was flat or downward in the 1970s. This is during the time of Maoism and the high communism of the Cultural Revolution in China. But since the reform and opening process began in 1979, inequality in China has zoomed up from being one of the most equal countries in the world in the 1970s, poor but equal, to being one of the most unequal countries of the world, even more unequal than the United States. China is up here at a Gini coefficient of around 0.53, while the United States is down here at somewhere around 0.42, 0.43. China has become one of the world's most unequal countries. It's gone from being on a level of Sweden to being on a level of Brazil. And that change has happened over the course of just 40 years of reform and opening. Okay. India has also had a massive increase in inequality. I don't have data for India's Gini coefficient, but I can show you the regional inequality in India. This is a map that shows the levels of GDP per capita in Indian states and union territories. And you can see this huge difference between places like not only Goa and Delhi, which are the richest, but between places like Maharashtra and Gujarat, which have GDP per capita around $2,000 per person, which is 8 times as high as GDP per capita in the poorest province, Bihar, here. It's about 4 times as high as GDP per capita in Uttar Pradesh, India's largest province. Between them, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar have about 330 million people, and they live at levels of income that are similar to those found in the poorest countries in the world. Bihar is on a par, on the same exact level as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the most crisis-torn country in Central Africa with constant civil war. Well, even people in the Democratic Republic of Congo, on average, live as well as people in Bihar. Uttar Pradesh, Bihar's larger neighbor, is on a level with Haiti or Rwanda. Not the very poorest countries in the world, but if Uttar Pradesh were a country, it would probably be between the 10th or 20th poorest country in the world. Now that compares with, Delhi has a GDP per capita around $4,000 per year, which, while not fantastic, is certainly, a middle income level. Even places like the big provinces of Maharashtra and Gujarat are at a level of $2,000 per year. So you can see there are enormous regional differences in India that compound the differences within any city or place in India. Okay, so we know there are enormous gaps in inequality. The question is, what do we do to reduce it? And I'd like to focus on 2 strategies that people talk about a lot. One is to produce equality of opportunity. That's here, equality of opportunity. And the other is to produce equality of outcomes. That's here, equality of outcomes. Now, if I can just briefly explain what each of these mean. Equality of opportunity means that every person in society is given the same opportunities to succeed. So that means eliminating barriers. Now, in India, that might mean eliminating the barriers caused by caste, any restrictions or discrimination based on caste. In China, it might mean eliminating people's the importance of the hukou status, of people's household registration. So allowing people everywhere in China to work anywhere they want instead of restricting them based on hukou status. But in places like Australia, equality of opportunity might mean making sure that there's no discrimination against people from non-white ethnic backgrounds. Or it might mean ensuring that public schools in poorer areas of Australia have the same resources as public schools in richer areas of Australia. It would mean creating opportunities for rural and indigenous residents of Australia to participate in the same kind of, to have the same kinds of opportunities for education and jobs as people in richer parts of Australia. So, for example, extending the national broadband network to rural and indigenous Australia would help create equality of opportunity among people in Australia. Now, equality of opportunity is certainly a good thing, but it's not the same thing as equality of outcomes. Equality of outcomes means that people have roughly the same income levels and that people have roughly the same kinds of jobs. So, for example, equality of outcome is created in Australia by having very high minimum wages achieved through award wages from, what used to be called Fair Work Australia. So raising the award wages at the bottom creates equality of outcomes. Ensuring that everybody in Australia has 4 weeks annual vacation is an equality of outcome. It doesn't matter whether you work for a fast food place or work for a university, you still get 4 weeks annual vacation in Australia. Providing universal health care ensures equality of outcome in Australia. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you all have access to medical care in Australia. Okay, so programs that promote equality of outcome don't depend on how hard people work or how talented people are. It just means that as a society, we ensure that everybody has access to health care or that everybody has a minimum decent standard of living. Okay. So equality of opportunity and quality of outcome are not opposed to each other. You can have both at the same time. You can have lots of equality of opportunity and lots of equality of outcomes. But there has been a trend recently towards promoting only the equality of opportunity and letting the market decide outcomes. Now, equality of opportunity sounds really good, but equality of opportunity means that smart people are likely to outperform less intelligent people. It means that highly ambitious people will get higher wages than less ambitious people. It means that people who are willing to work more hours or who are willing to sacrifice family in order to have success in the workplace will do better than people who put the family first. Now, those may be reasonable things to happen, but then they end up creating inequality of outcomes. For example, most of the wage disparity between men and women in the workplace it's certainly not due to differences in intelligence. Actually, on most intelligence tests, women score slightly higher than men, though it depends on the test. It's not due to differences in education. Women actually are, on average, in most countries, including in Australia, more educated than men. The wage gap between men and women is largely explained by men's willingness to work longer hours, by men being more aggressive in asking for raises, and by men being willing to or even wanting to work instead of to raise families. So while women often take career breaks to raise children, men very rarely do. And as a result, because there are equal opportunities in Australia for men and women, if men are unwilling to take career breaks to raise children, but women are, if men are repeatedly asking for raises, but women are not, if men want aggressive performance-based compensation, where women prefer more secure employment, then a wage gap opens up and men end up making more than women. That creates, of course, other power gaps in society. So while equality of opportunity sounds like a great thing, often equality of opportunity creates inequality in outcomes. If you instead ensure equality of outcomes, so for example, if you put like on a union contract, on a collective bargaining agreement, when you have a collective bargaining agreement, people of all abilities, and no matter how hard you work, get the same salary. That enforcement of equality of outcomes tends to reduce the opportunities available to people who want to work harder, to people who may be more talented, to people who are pushier and simply get more income for being pushier. Okay. So this is a central tension I'd like to set up. Now, I will open up a call-in line if I can find the link. And I would love for anyone to call in. Feel free to call in on Skype or using that phone number. It's a local Australian phone number, 02-8003-6853, or you can reach me on Skype Espabonus. I am thrilled to see that we have at least a few people who are commenting on the chat window, and I've moved over to the chat window, and I will say that the chat window is open too. I'd love to hear from any of you, and with hear any questions you may have that I could bring into the show. I do have one comment on the student is present. I'm thrilled to see you, so thanks for coming. But I'd also like to hear what you think. So does anyone want to leave a comment in the chat window or give me a call? Let's hear from you if you want to give me a call. I'd really be thrilled to hear. Okay, I'll leave that number up. I'm going to give it about 2 or 3 more minutes for anyone who wants to call in, because I really would love to talk to you. This tension between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity creates real challenges for social policy. And this is not a matter of one party versus another. I mean, these days, both political parties, whether it's in Australia or the United States or United Kingdom, promote equality of opportunity as their main goal. But of course, it's creating massive inequalities in outcomes. I mean, I'll put up the European chart again, just to illustrate this. Throughout the English-speaking world, we have had policies that have promoted much greater equality of opportunity over the last 40 years. We've outlawed discrimination on the basis of race and on the basis of often on the basis of sex, not in the United States, but in other countries on the basis of sex or gender, sexuality and gender. We've enforced better procedures, better procedural fairness to make sure that people don't nepotistically give jobs to their relatives or to favored people. We have much more open selection processes for jobs. And yet, despite all of these improvements in equality of opportunity, we see greater and greater inequality of outcomes. And personally, I think those two are related. I mean, if you think about a boxing match, if I give, me and, Evander Holyfield or Mike Tyson equality of opportunity to battle it out in a boxing match, I'm going to get killed, right? So what we want in an economy is not necessarily for people to have an equal playing field on which to battle it out. Often what we want is to restrain those who are most capable and to help out those who are least capable. That may sound morally difficult, especially if you're one of those who's being restrained. But if we don't do that, we could end up with extraordinary levels of inequality and extraordinary power differentials in society. And these differentials can be replicated in multiple areas of society. So once you create massive inequalities of wealth, you also create sexual abuse scandals of the kinds we've seen criticized by the Me Too movement. There's intersectionality in all of this because income differentials are connected to gender, they're connected to whiteness, they're connected to all sorts of levers of power in society. So I have a question, what we would do if we talk on the phone. If you have a question, just call in and ask it. I mean, that's what happens in class when students are in class and they have questions. They raise their hand and I answer the question. So I see 2 people saying hello on chat right now. And I'm just going to ask if anyone wants to give a call in or ask a question on chat. And I will take just 1 more minute to leave that open for phone calls or chat questions. And if we don't have any of that, I will wrap up the lecture in about 2 minutes. So we have any final comments, questions, or chats for this lecture. I'm going to give it a minute. All right, we have a call coming in. Let's take the call. Hello, you are live on audio on our lecture. Who am I talking to?
Oh, hi, it's Melinda. How you going?
Melinda, thanks for calling in. It's fantastic. I hope this technology is all working. Do you have anything to comment or question? And you are on audio.
Yes, but I've just paused the video because it seems that that might be pre-recorded, and so you're not speaking in line with on the phone. In other words, you're not speaking live.
There is a 10-second delay on the video, I think, as
okay.
it streams.
So should I leave it on or no? Because it's a bit distracting.
Just go ahead and ask the question, so I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
And maybe others can as well. Okay, so I basically am. So I'm writing my midterm report on the effect on basically gender inequality in Greece because of the austerity measures. It's very interesting. I hope that that's kind of hitting the right note.
Right, no, that's fantastic. And let me explain to students who are listening who may not be that familiar with Greece. During the global financial crisis, there was a European wing of that, which we often call the Euro crisis, which hit Greece particularly hard. And so in 2008, 2009, Greece had a severe economic crisis and also a government fiscal crisis. During that crisis, through a deal with the European Central Bank, the Greek government had to cut back pensions, cut back salaries for government workers, and this had a particularly strong impact on women because government workforce is disproportionately female. Also, many companies, when they let people go as a result of the crisis, fired women rather than men, which kind of was a double whammy for working women in Greece. So I hope, Melinda, that's more or less a good background.
Yes, indeed.
So
and
can
also, the other thing, I guess, where I'm springing my report off is the fact that there is a real sort of cultural gender imbalance in terms of the way that women are still viewed as, sort of the traditional domestic role.
Right.
And so, whilst there was some progress after the Second World War, women were encouraged as much as men to get educated because Greeks are big on education, etc. So a lot of those leaps, including being able to vote only since 1952, which is bizarre.
Right.
So a lot of those social kind of leaps that women made, it sort of feels a little bit like there's been a contraction since the global financial crisis austerity measures.
Right.
Even including things like domestic violence incidents.
Oh, wow.
Because of the economic stresses that are placed on families, which, as you pointed out, disproportionately falls to men because a lot of women, as you say, worked in the public sector. So I guess I suppose I need to refer it to the discussion today.
Well, it connects very closely to the discussion because I tend to focus on income, which has been the focus of my own academic research. But of course, there are all sorts of inequalities in society. And when you talk about domestic violence rising as a result of economic crisis, there are issues of equality of outcome in the family as well, right? What we want is for both men and women to have the opportunity to live in a violence-free world, right? So for men, unless we're involved in the drugs trade or we're criminals, most men do live in a violence-free world. But so many women, of course, don't, right? The violence that they experience is often in the home, not necessarily out in the larger world. And of course, there's this intersectionality again that these economic stresses interact with. That economic power in the world as a whole is mirrored and reinforced in economic power differentials in the home. Right?
Absolutely. And just to touch on more of the economic sort of stuff, like in terms of the austerity measures and the structural adjustment programs, including cutting public service jobs, as you acknowledged, but also welfare payments. A lot of those programs are cut, and often, women lean on those things. Again, if there's a separation, the burden of family and providing suddenly falls on the women, albeit in an environment and a culture that, again, like there is this sort of very dominant patriarchal notion about private work and public work, etc. So a lot of women have also, or there's been an increase in prostitution and also in, drug abuse and mental health stuff, like all of it. It's like it's ticking all the boxes in terms of depravity, I suppose, of a people. And so, but because a lot of those services have been cut, women don't get support even when they're on the bare bones of their asses.
Right.
In terms of having mental health issues and abuse problems. So, like they're just copying it from all sides.
Right.
It's a very interesting investigation. I kind of wasn't sure which way I would go, but as a
Right. Oh, I think we lost Melinda. We have another call coming in. So let me take the second call. But let me wrap up with Melinda first before we get started with this next call. Melinda, thanks for calling and thanks for your comments. And, I tend to focus on the upside. As economic growth has occurred, it hasn't benefited all people. But I think what you're focusing on, the downside, is disproportionately hurting particular people in society, especially women, and especially low-income women. That's also an aspect of how inequality of outcomes is affecting society. Let me, Melinda, thanks for calling in. Let me go to our next caller who just called in. Hello? Hello, who just called in? I have you on Skype.
Hello. I guess I'm
turn off your computer audio and or your video audio, and we'll talk on Skype because there's a time delay between the two.
Okay. I know our society is set up for reward for excellence. If we have equality of outcomes, doesn't that diminish reward for excellence?
It absolutely does, and that's the question we have is if someone like a Mark Zuckerberg creates a new way for people to communicate and makes billions of dollars, to what extent is that his billions of dollars, and to what extent should that be fed back into the rest of society? Now, all developed countries have progressive taxation systems, meaning that the more money you make, the higher you pay in taxes. And that's a way of creating equality of outcomes, right? Now, those progressive income taxes used to be on the order of 90%. The highest income brackets paid 90% in taxes. Now, in most countries, that's down in the 40s.
Yes. All right.
But I'm curious what you think.
So there was death duty.
I'm curious what you think about that.
One more time, sorry.
I'm curious to hear what you think about that. Should we be giving the full reward for excellence to people who excel, which also has a moral, quality to it?
Well, of course, there's two, I guess, binary arguments. And the one argument is, of course, society has helped them in their activities to excel, and therefore they do need to give back in the form of taxation or death duties or other forms of company tax. Otherwise, they have. Otherwise, the other binary is yes, it's theirs. They made it,
right.
But of course, I know they didn't make it all on their own.
Yeah, which way do you think we should go? I mean, I think it's interesting that all developed countries have progressive income taxes, but most middle-income countries actually have flat income taxes, where you don't pay more as you get richer. You pay a flat percentage. I mean, do you have a preference for one system over the other?
Wouldn't it depend on other variations of tax, and whether they have a healthcare system and whether they have an education system as we do in Australia?
Right.
It's
I mean,
not just
yeah.
one thing.
Yeah, these are all
it's a variation of triggers to pull to equalize our society.
Right, right. These are all policy levers we can pull, and some of them ensure equality of opportunity, some of them ensure equality of outcomes, and some are at the intersection, right? So, what is education? I mean, high quality public education provides equality of opportunity because all students then get the same, head start in life, but it also creates equality of outcomes because parents who it eliminates the difference for parents between parents who can pay for a good education versus parents who can't, right? It's a free service given to all parents. So it works on both of those levers. So, we're not always choosing between these two, but in the end, there is some tension between the two that we have to make a choice. At the extremes, there's always a choice to be made.
All right, and there's a choice of time periods. There's a time for, say, a death duty, and there's a time for high personal tax or low personal tax. There's times for all these levers as well.
Yeah, that's certainly I would say your approach sounds very balanced, and balanced doesn't necessarily mean right. Some people would say we should be much more equal, and some people would say let the people achieve whatever they can. And what you seem to be saying is we'd like both of those, a golden mean to have a good society. Is that fair enough?
I don't want to be stupidly idealistic or euphoric about the middle way or whatever it's called.
Right.
But I do think that there are times and places for different forms of taxation depending on what the economy and what personal wealth is created.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're right. Should we go to the next caller? Are you good, or do you want to add anything else?
Caller. Thank you very much.
All right, no, thank you for calling in. I really appreciate it. Ken is making some comments on the chat window, and Ken is pointing out that even influential women in rich countries have high levels of sexual assault. Does that mean that the gender gap doesn't really matter much? We don't have a lot of data on this, but the data we do have strongly suggests that levels of sexual violence are highly correlated with income. So people who are within countries. So within countries, people who are poorer tend to experience much more sexual violence. And women who are poorer tend to experience much more sexual violence. Now, honestly, I don't know how that compares across countries. So we've heard a lot of news lately about serious cases of just horrific murder, rape cases in India over the last week, and people often attribute that to poverty. But I think there's not a lot of good evidence that extreme sexual violence is more prevalent in poor countries than in rich countries. It's very difficult to study these things cross-nationally. So Ken, I hope that answers your question in the comments. Does anyone else want to call in? I'll give it let's say half a minute more because I know there's a delay on the video. And let me just remind everyone those numbers are up on the screen. And if you want to give a call in the next few minutes or we'll wrap up the video. I would really love to get another caller if someone wants to call in. All right, I think we are close to a wrap. Thanks everyone for listening. I really do appreciate it. This is an experiment. If you guys like this, email me, let me know. We can try this again in future weeks. I've just been trying to put the technology together and I've just got to the point where I think it can work. So I'll listen to this video after the recording has posted and see how it seems, see how it looks, see how it sounds, and if it worked, we'll try to do this again in future weeks. Thanks everyone who called in. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your comments in the comment line, and I'll be going offline now. Thanks everyone. I really appreciate your participation.